It was supposed to be a routine visit, just a quick stop at my friend's house to drop off some notes and catch up. The street was quiet, the air carrying the faint scent of jasmine from a neighbor's garden. The house itself had a warm glow from the living room window, light spilling out into the dim evening, inviting and calm. I rang the bell, expecting a simple greeting from my friend. Instead, the door opened, and there she was. The widow, in her early 40s, stood there with a presence that was both composed and quietly magnetic. She was dressed simply, yet the way her sweater draped over her shoulders and the soft fall of her hair gave her an elegance that seemed effortless. Her eyes met mine with a calm intensity, neither intimidating nor demanding, but piercing enough to make me aware of every movement, every word I might say. "Hello," she said, her voice low and smooth, carrying warmth but also a subtle playfulness. It was the kind of greeting that felt deliberate, as if she had been expecting me to notice her. I nodded, slightly taken aback, and felt a flutter of something I hadn't anticipated. As I stepped inside, the house smelled faintly of fresh coffee and the soft, lingering scent of lavender. There was a quiet rhythm to the place, the hum of a ceiling fan, the distant tick of a clock, the gentle creak of wooden floors underfoot. Everything felt alive, familiar, yet charged with an undercurrent of something I couldn't immediately name. She gestured for me to leave my bag by the couch and offer me a glass of water. Our fingers brushed as I took it, brief, accidental, but the warmth of her touch lingered far longer than it should have. I caught myself noticing small details, the curve of her smile, the way her eyes softened when she spoke, the slight scent of her perfume that seemed to wrap around me. Each detail etched itself into my mind, and a strange, thrilling awareness began to settle in my chest. She asked casually about my day, her tone conversational, yet I could feel an undercurrent in her voice, curiosity, attentiveness, and perhaps a subtle testing of boundaries. Every small movement, from the tilt of her head to the way she rested her hands on the countertop, seemed infused with a quiet grace. It was impossible not to notice her, impossible not to feel drawn into the orbit of her calm confidence. Even as the conversation drifted toward mundane topics, school, mutual friends, homework, there was a tension, subtle and slow building, that I couldn't ignore. A glance lasted slightly too long. A smile lingered, just a heartbeat more than necessary, and suddenly, the visit was no longer ordinary. Something unspoken had begun to form between us, a quiet thread of connection that promised intrigue, curiosity, and a slow, inevitable pull. By the time my friend appeared from upstairs, I realized that the evening had already shifted. This wasn't just a casual visit. I had stepped into a space where warmth, subtle attention, and the quiet allure of someone older and profoundly captivating had begun to stir feelings I wasn't ready to name. Feelings that would grow stronger, deeper, and more complicated as the night unfolded. After my friend disappeared upstairs, the house felt unusually quiet. The soft hum of the ceiling fan, the faint ticking of the wall clock, and the muted glow of the living room lamp created a cocoon of warmth. She appeared from the kitchen carrying a small basket of laundry, moving with effortless grace, each motion calm and deliberate. "Could you give me a hand with this?" she asked, her voice casual, yet carrying an undertone that made my chest tighten. As I reached for the basket, our hands brushed, lightly, almost imperceptibly, but the brief contact sent a jolt through me. Her eyes met mine with a fleeting smile, soft and teasing, as if she were aware of the effect she had on me. We moved together through the living room, stacking clothes on the sofa. Every step, every gesture felt like a delicate dance. Our shoulders occasionally grazed. Her hair sometimes brushed against my arm, and though the touches were entirely innocent, a subtle warmth lingered in their wake. The scent of her perfume, soft jasmine and a hint of vanilla, wrapped around me, making the mundane act of folding laundry feel unexpectedly intimate. The conversation flowed easily at first, casual questions about school, mutual friends, and weekend plans. But gradually, it shifted, drifting toward personal glimpses, small stories from her life, reflections on the past, moments of quiet honesty that hinted at vulnerability beneath her confident exterior. I found myself listening intently, not just to her words, but to the rhythm of her voice, the slight pauses, the subtle inflections that made every sentence feel layered with meaning. At one point, as she reached across the counter to grab a folded towel, her hand brushed mine again. This time, the contact lingered, slightly longer, deliberate yet natural. I felt a subtle heat rise in my chest, awareness sharpening with every passing second. She didn't pull away immediately. Instead, her eyes held mine for a moment, and I sensed an unspoken acknowledgement, a quiet recognition of the tension growing between us. Even ordinary gestures became charged. Handing her a folded shirt, leaning slightly to adjust a cushion, laughing at a minor mishap with the laundry. Each interaction was layered with subtle intimacy. Her laughter, soft and melodic, echoed in the room and seemed to settle over me like a gentle warmth, making the space between us feel smaller, closer, more alive. By the time the laundry was sorted, I realized that something had shifted. The casual, mundane tasks had become a conduit for connection, drawing us together in ways neither words nor actions could fully explain. Every glance, every accidental touch, every shared smile had built a quiet tension, a magnetic pull that neither of us could ignore. Even as my friend's footsteps echoed from upstairs, signaling his return, the intimacy lingered. I was acutely aware of the warmth, the subtle electricity of our proximity, and the delicate line we were walking. It was thrilling and unnerving all at once, the beginning of a slow, inevitable emotional entanglement that neither of us could have anticipated, yet both were drawn toward. Later that evening, the house settled into quiet intimacy. The faint hum of the ceiling fan mingled with the distant rhythm of cars outside, and the muted glow of the living room lamp cast gentle shadows across the furniture. My friend had retired to his room, leaving just the two of us in the warm cocoon of the house. She appeared with 2 steaming cups of tea, moving with her usual graceful ease. She placed 1 cup in front of me, and our fingers brushed lightly as I accepted it. The contact was brief, but the warmth lingered, like a spark igniting quietly between us. I noticed the subtle curve of her smile, the softness in her eyes, and the delicate perfume that seemed to envelope her. Everything about her presence made the air feel heavier, charged with something unspoken. We sat together on the couch, the distance between us small but electric. Conversation flowed at first casual and easy. School, weekend plans, shared memories. Yet, beneath the words, a tension simmered, subtle but undeniable. Our glances lingered slightly longer than necessary. A laugh would come, and I would catch her watching me with a faint, teasing curiosity. There was a rhythm to our interaction that neither of us acknowledged verbally, but both felt acutely. Then, leaning slightly closer as if compelled by the moment, she lowered her voice to a whisper, "You're young, but that's exactly my weakness." The word sent a thrill through me, subtle and intense all at once. It wasn't overtly flirtatious, yet the meaning was layered, playful, intriguing, and impossibly intimate. Her breath, warm and soft, brushed past my ear, and my heartbeat picked up. I could feel the quiet electricity of the moment, the charged space between us where every glance, every subtle movement carried weight. The whisper was both a warning and an invitation, a delicate balancing act that made the impossible feel thrilling. Our hands met briefly as she adjusted the blanket over my shoulders, accidental yet deliberate, and I was acutely aware of the warmth radiating from her skin. The subtle touch, combined with the low intimacy of her words, created a tension that was almost tangible, a slow, simmering fire neither of us could ignore. We settled into companionable silence, each aware of the growing bond, yet careful not to cross boundaries. Every small gesture, the tilt of her head, the softness in her voice, the slight brush of her hair against my shoulder, amplified the connection. The air seemed to vibrate with unspoken words, a shared understanding that something delicate, thrilling, and complicated was unfolding. Even after my friend's footsteps echoed from upstairs, signaling his presence, the tension lingered. I could still feel the echo of her whisper in my chest, the warmth of her touch on my arm, the weight of her gaze in the quiet of the room. That single phrase had shifted everything. Casual familiarity had transformed into a slow-burning attraction, charged with curiosity, vulnerability, and the thrill of the forbidden. By the time the night deepened, the moment had passed physically but not emotionally. The whisper had opened a door, and behind it lay a connection that neither time nor circumstance could ignore. The days after that whisper confession were unlike anything I had experienced before. Every time I stepped into the house, a quiet tension greeted me, subtle but impossible to ignore. I found myself acutely aware of her presence, the soft sway of her hair as she moved, the gentle warmth of her hand brushing against mine, the melodic cadence of her voice even when speaking about mundane topics. Each small detail tugged at something deeper, something I wasn't ready to name. It was thrilling and terrifying all at once. On one hand, I was drawn to her wisdom, her confidence, and the effortless way she commanded attention without demanding it. On the other, I felt the weight of social boundaries pressing down. She was my friend's mother, a woman whose life experiences far exceeded mine, and yet here I was, utterly captivated. Guilt intertwined with fascination, creating a storm of emotions that left me both exhilarated and paralyzed. Every interaction became layered with subtext. A casual conversation about homework or the neighborhood could carry a subtle tension, a glance that lingered just a second too long, a smile that hinted at shared understanding. Even mundane touches, handing her a dish, adjusting a cushion, or passing a book, felt electric. I noticed the warmth of her hand against mine, the way her fingers seemed to linger when our hands brushed. Each fleeting contact created ripples in my chest, a quiet fire that I couldn't extinguish. I began analyzing every word, every movement. Was she aware of the effect she had on me? Did her subtle glances mean curiosity, playfulness, or something more? The uncertainty made every interaction thrilling, yet I constantly questioned myself. Was it right to feel this way? Was it merely the excitement of the forbidden, or had something real begun to develop between us? Her presence became both comforting and disorienting. When she laughed at something trivial, I found myself smiling long after, replaying the sound in my mind. When she spoke softly, recounting memories or personal anecdotes, I felt an unspoken trust forming, an intimacy that went beyond casual friendliness. And yet, the very same intimacy stirred guilt, reminding me that the feelings growing inside me were complicated and delicate. Even when I was alone, the echoes of her voice, the memory of her touch, and the warmth of her gaze lingered. I realized that my emotions were no longer simple admiration or casual curiosity. They had evolved into something deeper, a fascination, a longing, and a subtle, unacknowledged desire. I also noticed her subtle signals, lingering eye contact, a hand brushing mine under the guise of casual conversation, moments of playful teasing that carried weight beyond words. Each interaction was a test, a dance of proximity and restraint. And every time I felt the pull toward her, I reminded myself of the boundaries, yet found that restraint only made the tension more acute. By the end of each day, I was left with a mixture of exhilaration, confusion, and anticipation. The whisper, the brushed hands, the unspoken connection. They had opened a door I couldn't close, and now I stood on the threshold of something thrilling, uncertain, and profoundly intimate. The evening arrived with a gentle hush, the golden light from the living room lamp spilling across the walls. Outside, the world seemed to fade. The distant hum of traffic and the whisper of wind through trees created a quiet cocoon. She appeared in the doorway, carrying 2 cups of tea, her expression calm, yet slightly vulnerable, a softness that seemed rare and unguarded. We sat together on the couch, close enough that the blanket draped over our shoulders covered both of us. The warmth of the fabric mirrored the warmth of her presence. The tea steamed between our hands, and I noticed the delicate rise and fall of her chest as she sipped, the subtle perfume lingering in the air, mingling with the faint scent of rain that had drifted in earlier. Everything about her presence felt intimate, grounding, yet tinged with an unspoken thrill. The conversation began cautiously, drifting from trivial topics towards something more personal. She spoke quietly about her late husband, about loneliness, about moments of doubt and strength she had discovered in the quiet of her life. Her voice carried an honesty that was both disarming and captivating. I listened intently, aware of the subtle tremor in her tone and the occasional pause that suggested she was sharing more than she usually allowed. As she spoke, our hands brushed under the blanket. Light, almost accidental, yet deliberate enough to send a ripple of awareness through me. The touch was fleeting, but it carried weight, reassurance, trust, and a quiet invitation into her emotional world. Her eyes held mine, soft yet searching, revealing glimpses of vulnerability and curiosity that mirrored my own conflicted emotions. I found myself speaking more openly than I ever expected, sharing small insecurities, the nervous excitement of my day, and moments when I felt unsure of myself. The act of sharing was electrifying in its intimacy. Each word seemed to build a bridge between us, a connection that went far beyond casual acquaintance. Her laughter was gentle, encouraging, and sometimes tinged with amusement at my candidness, yet always kind, never judgmental. At one point, she reached out to adjust the blanket over my shoulders, her fingers brushing my arm. The contact lingered slightly longer than necessary, and I felt a warmth spreading through my chest, awareness sharpening with every heartbeat. The closeness was comfortable, safe, yet charged with a tension neither of us could name. It was the perfect balance of restraint and unspoken desire, a delicate acknowledgement of the growing bond between us. We fell into a quiet silence, each aware of the other's presence, the air thick with emotion and subtle anticipation. The storm of earlier feelings, curiosity, admiration, guilt, attraction, had settled into a steady rhythm of connection. It was clear that this evening had shifted something fundamental. Trust had deepened, emotional walls had lowered, and a slow, simmering intimacy had been established. By the time the tea was finished, the room felt warmer, closer. There was no rush, no need for words to define the moment. The night had created a space where vulnerability and curiosity coexisted, leaving both of us aware that our connection was real, fragile, and profoundly significant. The slow-burn romance had truly begun. In the days that followed, the atmosphere between us grew charged with a subtle, unspoken tension. Each visit, each shared moment, became a delicate balance between curiosity and restraint. Every glance, every brush of hands carried weight. It was no longer just admiration or fleeting attraction. It had evolved into a quiet, magnetic pull that neither of us could ignore. She invited me to help with small tasks around the house, rearranging books on a shelf, carrying groceries, or simply organizing a stack of papers. Each task was ordinary, yet the proximity made everything feel intimate. Shoulders grazed as we moved side by side. Fingers accidentally brushed while passing objects. A gentle laugh followed minor mishaps, her eyes twinkling with amusement. Even these seemingly mundane moments carried a subtle electricity, a slow, simmering thrill that neither words nor gestures could fully express. One evening, we found ourselves in the living room again, the warm glow of the lamp casting soft shadows across her features. She moved slightly closer under the pretense of adjusting a blanket, and our hands met, brief, almost accidental, yet lingering just enough to make the moment feel charged. The warmth of her touch, the softness of her skin against mine, made my heartbeat quicken. Every slight movement was layered with intention, a dance of closeness and restraint. Conversations began to take on new depth. Casual chatter about the day or shared memories subtly shifted toward personal reflections, small admissions of vulnerability, or quiet observations about life. Her voice carried a softness, a warmth, and a cadence that invited honesty, allowing me to speak openly about thoughts I rarely shared. The emotional intimacy grew alongside the physical closeness, each feeding the other in a quiet, irresistible rhythm. We started noticing the small, almost imperceptible signals that had previously been background noise, a lingering glance when one of us laughed, a touch that seemed accidental but deliberate, the way she adjusted her hair when I looked at her. These gestures tested the boundaries, not overtly, not recklessly, but carefully, deliberately, exploring the tension between desire and propriety. It was a game of closeness and distance, each aware of the other's pull, both hesitant and drawn toward crossing the invisible line. Even as the tension built, there was a deep sense of mutual respect. Every gesture was measured, never forcing a boundary, but quietly challenging it. The age difference, the societal expectations, and the unspoken rules hovered in the background, shaping the way we moved around each other. This awareness made the connection feel more thrilling, more intimate, and more human. By the end of these days, the relationship had evolved into a slow, deliberate dance of emotion and restraint. The warmth of her presence, the subtle touches, and the shared silences had created a world of intimacy that was both thrilling and comforting. Every encounter left us acutely aware of the connection growing between us, building toward a moment when one of us might finally risk crossing the line, and neither of us knew what the consequences would be. Morning arrived gently, sunlight spilling through the curtains and casting a warm glow across the living room. The quiet hum of the city outside was softened by the serenity inside the house, where the lingering tension of previous days had transformed into something calm, intimate, and familiar. The world felt slower, more attentive, as if it were holding its breath along with us. She appeared in the doorway carrying 2 cups of coffee, her presence calm, yet somehow magnetic. Her hair fell softly around her shoulders, and a relaxed smile played on her lips. There was no urgency in her movements, just a quiet, deliberate grace that made the room feel alive with her warmth. I noticed the subtle scent of her perfume mixing with the aroma of the coffee, a combination that was soothing yet intoxicating. We sat across from each other at the small kitchen table, the cups warming our hands. Conversation was light at first, remarks about the morning, plans for the day, and the occasional shared laugh. But underneath, an unspoken acknowledgement passed between us. There was no need for grand declarations or dramatic gestures. The connection we had built over days of subtle touches, lingering glances, and whispered words was understood in the quiet spaces between sentences. Her hand brushed mine as she passed me a spoon, a fleeting contact that felt weighted with meaning. I could feel the warmth lingering long after, a reminder of the trust, the tension, and the emotional intimacy we had nurtured. It wasn't reckless, wasn't hurried. It was deliberate, gentle, and entirely human. Each subtle touch and glance had built a bridge between us, and now it seemed solid, steady, and real. For a while, we simply sat in companionable silence, drinking our coffee and occasionally exchanging soft smiles. The morning light illuminated the room and her features, highlighting the quiet confidence and vulnerability she carried. There was a sense of completion in the way our interactions had evolved. The initial intrigue, the playful tension, the whispered desires, and the emotional vulnerability had all led to this gentle, fulfilling intimacy. She spoke softly, almost as if testing the air. "You make this house feel alive." Her words struck me with clarity, and I realized that the feeling was mutual. Every visit, every shared task, every brush of her hand had transformed ordinary moments into extraordinary memories. The connection between us had grown into a slow, steady warmth, a resonance that didn't require verbal affirmation to be understood. As the morning progressed, We moved through small routines together, adjusting cushions, carrying items to another room, sharing a laugh over a minor mishap. Each movement, each glance, each subtle touch reaffirmed the bond we had cultivated. It was comfortable, warm, and deeply satisfying, a slow-burn romance that had reached its natural resolution. By midday, it was clear. The initial curiosity, the tension of unspoken attraction, and the thrill of boundaries being tested had culminated in a quiet, enduring intimacy. We didn't need dramatic gestures or overt declarations. The connection, steady and profound, spoke for itself. The story of our slow-burn bond, tempered by respect, deep emotion, and subtle desire, had found its completion in this quiet, shared understanding.